I've watched a couple of years in review when it comes to sport, and I think some of them are missing the point. 2024 has been a huge year, pointing to a lot of changes and shifts, and 2025 is going to deliver more. This is my take. If you go to Google's most searched Australians in 2024, 6 of the top 10 are female athletes. Not a single male was included in the list. All of them Olympians, which points to how big the Olympics still remains, no matter how many people want to discount it. If you go to the most searched athletes globally, this is what you find. Algerian boxer Iman Khalif, because of the controversy around her inclusion, was the #1 most searched athlete globally. Also in the top 5, Simone Biles, coming in at number 4. Now, regarding some of those shifts I was talking about, of course, Australia is a unique market and globally things are kind of different. But if we look at cricket, one of the sports on the rise internationally because of the impact of India and the Indian diaspora, at the all-important Boxing Day test held at the MCG in Melbourne, the home of sport in Australia, on day 4 of the almost 50,000 people that were there, more than 70% of them were there to support the visitors, the Indian team. At the same time, the Brisbane International Tennis was being played. This is one of the warm-up tournaments before the first Grand Slam match of the year, the Australian Open. Now, here are 2 players that are completely and almost always discounted by the mainstream media in Australia. Nick Kyrgios, making his comeback after a long-term injury layoff, and Novak Djokovic teamed up as a doubles pair. They absolutely wowed the crowds, both in the venue and, of course, during their television broadcast. But one thing that people fail to address quite often is that the 2 of those players combined have a following of more than 20 million people. That's more than any television program in Australia. The biggest event of 2024, without doubt, was the Paris 2024 Olympic and Paralympic Games. On social media platforms, there were a record 412 billion engagements, not views, engagements. When it comes to the IOC's own digital and social media platforms, they also had a record 16.7 billion engagements. So now to 2025 and the trends as I see them, something to look out for in the year ahead if you are also fascinated by what sport tells us about our world and about our societies, as I am. First of all, the IOC is going to elect a new president who will determine a new path forward for the Olympic movement. Most of the English press have a focus on Lord Sebastian Coe, the president of World Athletics. Of course, we know he's got a long history in sport, both from being a gold medal Olympian through to running an Olympic Games, to being a politician, and of course now being an IOC member and president of one of the most influential Olympic sports. But don't discount the others. France's David Lepatien, he's enjoyed a lot of support from the outgoing president Thomas Bach. He's also recently helped deliver the very successful Paris 2024 Olympic Games. Zimbabwe's Kirsty Coventry is hoping to become both the first woman and the first African to be the president of the International Olympic Committee. From the Middle East, His Royal Highness Prince Faisal, who has a long history of working with sport to look at peace and diplomacy around the world. Juan Antonio Samaranch is a familiar name. His father was a former president of the IOC. He also has a long tradition and deep understanding inside the Olympic movement. Morinari Watanabe of Japan is interesting. He's the president of the International Gymnastics Federation. He's also got a revolutionary idea of staging the Olympics in 5 cities from 5 continents simultaneously to address the economic and environmental challenges that the Olympic movement faces. And a newcomer to the Olympic movement, a recently admitted member from Switzerland, Johan Eliasch. He's advocating for streamlining, modernising and sustainability. I mentioned with Prince Faisal the growing role of diplomacy. I see that continuing in sport. And I don't just mean diplomacy looking at purely an economic benefit, but actually the strengthening of ties and relationships culturally and socially around the world. This is one of my trends I'm predicting for 2025. Also, without doubt, many people would point to the same thing, the growing influence of the Middle East generally and Saudi Arabia specifically. Now, unlike a lot of the other critics or pundits or followers of this sort of thing, I probably sit on a bit of a different landscape. I think it's important that we embrace this growing part of the world and the impact that they can have on sport. By working together, it's the only way we can guarantee that sport continues to make great strides, positive strides, in wherever the flashpoints may be. And the third trend I see when I look at stories and do interviews with athletes like Naomi Osaka, for instance, from tennis, and I watch what is happening with Nick Kyrgios and others, athletes now have such strong followings that they don't need to rely on the traditions and the way things were done in the past. I think there'll be less of a reliance on the scores and the statistics and the never-ending pursuit of rankings points. Players now are determining when they buy in and when they opt out for mental well-being, for the health of their families, for all sorts of other reasons, for just exploring different areas in their lives. I see this as a growing area for athletes. They determine their own picture because they can afford to, which brings me to the top 10 most influential athletes when it comes to social media. Forget mainstream, that's yesterday. Social media is where it's happening. And if you look at the mainstream, nearly everything they do is influenced now by what's happening and what's trending on social media. So here are the top 10 athletes according to social media and Brand Vision Insights. The most influential in 2024 continues to be Cristiano Ronaldo with 642 million followers. Coming up second, Lionel Messi, 505 million. Virat Kohli from India and cricket, 271 million, one of the growing sports, especially when you look at its re-inclusion in the Olympics for LA in 2028. Brazil's Neymar Jr. has 226 million followers. The NBA's LeBron James, who just turned 40 and is still going strong, he comes in there in the top 5 with 159 million followers. Kylian Mbappe next, 122, Steph Curry 58 million, Conor McGregor 47, Jude Bellingham 37, and the only female to crack the top 10, Simone Biles, with 12 million followers on Instagram. This is the new world, folks. Happy New Year.